Tell me your thoughts on stopping power.
Well, I think it's, as has been brought up before, hard to quantify. Regardless of what we may think stopping power may be, it all depends what the bad guy's doing. There are just so many variables between the ammunition, mental state of our assailant, physical aspects, chemicals, alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. So it's tough to, I think, put a number on it. I can remember some of the first numbers I saw, something called relative incapacitation index. I think this is late 70s, and I think Department of Justice came up with this, but they had every known round to man, and they had a number after it. So you were looking for the one with the highest relative incapacitation index back in the day. And it did favor, I think, if I recall correctly, 357 mags. You know, there wasn't nearly the variety of auto pistol rounds because nobody was really using them back then except for a few folks. So that's what I hung my hat on for a while. And anyway, I was skeptical about some of the data they had come up with. Not that I had anything better to offer. You know, and again, back in the day, we tested, I mean, shooting wet phone books and milk jugs and nonsense like that. But just to tie into some of the things that were brought up earlier about velocity versus bullet weight and that sort of nonsense, I think probably the best illustration is 38 Special versus 357 mags, assuming lightweight projectiles, let's say 125 grain. I think it's generally agreed with this group here, 125 grain 357 mag at 1,400 feet per second. It's pretty much an ass-kicking round. Pretty high likelihood of putting somebody down. Now let's take that same bullet and load it to 850 or 900 feet per second, like a 38 out of a 4-inch barrel or something like that. And that stopping potential goes way, way down. Oh, why is that? There are any number of folks, as you know, who don't believe anything like temporary cavities and that sort of thing and how it relates to incapacitation. But I would rest my case on that because, again, you have a 38 Special round, same weight bullet, and not nearly as effective as that same bullet driven to 1,400 feet per second. Anyway, we had kicked around this issue of the old Treasury load and that sort of thing. For those unaware of that, was a relatively lightweight bullet, 38 Special driven to plus P plus velocities. And some years ago, a buddy of mine brought, we go to the range one Saturday morning, he says, hey, look, I got my new Smith & Wesson Performance Center 357 mag with the quadruport in the end. Cool, I had the chronograph there. I said, I've got a Glock 26 here, and I've got a Colt Detective Special here and a couple of these Treasury loads. We chronographed all this stuff, and the scary part about it, that 357 mag and that short ported barrel didn't even break 1,200 feet per second. You could easily duplicate that with the Dick Special with the Treasury load. I said, watch this. 5 rounds in your gun. This gun has 11 rounds, and I had Federal BPLE, which I still have a small variety of that at home. Plus P plus, 115 grain, 9 millimeter. And out of that Glock 26, it was going about 1,250 feet per second. So what one would I rather have in my gun? Much easier to shoot, and it did the job. Border Patrol, I believe, used that load for some time and had some pretty good results with it. So, as I said, I don't think it's easy thing or perhaps even impossible to quantify and assign numbers to it because, again, there's just so many variables. And I think the modern ammunition, as Dave had brought up earlier, even some of the heavyweight loads, the 147s, are not your dad's 147 grain load from 1985 or whenever. They do probably perform a little bit better. I still prefer to shoot the 115s or 124s, and that's what I have in my gun because I think they give me the best chance of prevailing should I have to actually use that in a deadly force encounter.
So we're pretty much in agreement before we move on to the next section that sometimes lightweight going really, really fast to try to replicate that rifle round is going to be better than heavy going really, really slow at the risk of now putting it through a shorter barrel, going slower than it was originally intended to go and possibly fail.
Or about all I could quibble with on that would be characterizing the 124 grain as light. For many years, it was the standard weight for the 9mm power belt.
Good point.
We had, back in the day, 90 grain, 95 grain, 100 grain 9mm bullets, and those were light.
Right.
The 147 really upped the game, and that became essentially the heavyweight, and it put the 124 in the middleweight ground.
That's a good point. Good point. Dave?
Or we could take any of these bullets and put them someplace that they'll do some good.
Shot placement.
Well, what are we really doing with our pistol bullets? We're attacking the circulatory system. We're punching holes in the circulatory system so blood drains out, so blood pressure drops. And when it drops below a certain point, the person can't maintain consciousness and they pass out or become comatose. That's what pistol bullets do, and that's all they do. Velocity, I think, in itself is a factor. It becomes certainly more of a factor when you get up to above 2,500 feet per second, which no pistol is going to do. All pistol bullets are relatively low velocity, and the reason we like to shoot, the body midline is we want to punch holes in the circulatory system. When we blow the ventricles out of his heart, Mass pointed this out earlier, he's still got absolute minimum 5 seconds of animation. And probably more than that. The 5 seconds is the absolute minimum. But that's what bullets are going to do, and that's pretty much all they're going to do. And we need adequate penetration to do that, and we need, a bullet that expands, increasing its frontal area and the spinning, maybe, cut things up as it goes through. I think those bullets are going to perform the best.
Yeah, certainly a bullet that goes in and stops is going to be better than one goes through like an ice pick.
Right.
I mean, I think everybody can see that.
Yes.
Well, and one analogy we used to use back in the ammo days was every particular projectile. It didn't matter if it was a 9mm, 40 cal, 45. Every projectile, every bullet had a window of performance based on the design of that projectile.
Yes.
So you can take a specific projectile, 9mm silver tip, 115 grain silver tip. You had a certain window of performance where if it was at, say, 1,200 feet per second, it still expanded. If it was at 1,300 feet per second, it expanded. If it was beyond, say, it was at 1,350, it now started to fragment. And if it was under a certain velocity, it didn't expand
At all.
So every projectile has a window of performance. The performance meaning at this point only expansion. Okay, not failing by clogging up or breaking apart. Even though in my days with you, and we used to talk about this a lot, fragmentation was a good thing. Okay, a bullet losing pieces was okay, but when we look at the window of performance of a projectile, some projectiles have a broader window of performance, some have a more narrow window of performance. So that's why it was really hard in the ammo days to try to say, okay, I'm going to make a 45 185 jacketed hollow point. It's going to work all day out of a 5-inch gun. But there used to be a thing called an AMT backup that had a barrel about the length of my pinky, 2.5, 3 inches. And then now all of a sudden it lost so much velocity, now it would clog up. Well, it all goes back to the window of performance of that projectile.
And in your business, you didn't manufacture bullets. You bought bullets from vendors.
Initially, I bought bullets from vendors until I had our quick shock bullet, which was my bullet, our
Okay.
patented bullet. But even then, when I bought bullets from vendors, we found out very quickly, early on, that when you bought a bullet from, say, Sierra, they had a specific cavity, they had a specific antimony content to the core, and getting into the weeds. But what we found out was what Sierra made or Nosler made. The Nosler made a great 9mm, but we didn't like their 45. But Sierra made a great 45, but we didn't like their 357 Magnum. So what we finally started doing is we went to Hornady, and we said, okay, we want a conical cavity in our projectile. We want specific skives. We want a specific antimony content to the core or a pure lead core. And then we started actually making the specific projectiles to our specifications. So when I did the High-Vel line, which was a jacketed hollow point that Moss used to sell, that was our bullet. And then when we had the quick shock.
But you didn't actually make it.
No.
You
They
gave
made it
them
to our,
right.
correct. They
And
made it to our specifications.
if you want several million, I'm sure they're happy to do it. If you want a couple dozen, I'm sure they're going to laugh in your face.
Absolutely.
So you had to make a commitment to order that many. And a lot of ammunition manufacturers, not even to that point, they're going to have to take what the vendors give them.
Oh, agreed.
And as you say, they do their testing and they find a window, and that's what we end up with.
And some companies don't even test. I'll be honest. There's ammo companies out there that just make ammo for the sake of making ammo. And they're going to use a hollow point.
Yeah, I
but
wouldn't.
will every ammo company out there, and I'm not talking about SAMI members, I'm talking about the smaller ammo companies that aren't a member of SAMI, are they all going to pressure test and chronograph? Maybe chronograph, but are they going to pressure test? Are they using an Ailer system? Are they legitimately using a piezoelectric strain gauge? Probably not. I remember back in the day, Corbon wasn't pressure testing in the early days. Later they did.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's so many variables with ammunition, so many variables, which actually brings me to the next point. Cartridges that have come and gone, and come again and gone again. I'll just toss some out there. You guys run with them. But we have the 10 millimeter, which was originally a nice hot cartridge by Norma that got wimpified to a 40 Smith & Wesson. We had the 41 Action Express that most people probably didn't even know was a predecessor to the 40 Smith & Wesson. We had the 356 TSW, or 9x21.5,
Right.
if you want to call it that. The 357 SIG that kicked its ass because they both came out at the same time.
9x23.
9x23, John Ricco, if I remember correctly, did that. And that was,
Some friends took that overseas and tested it on some real people, and they were pretty happy with it, but it never went anywhere.
no, it was dead.
It's a little more than an obscure footnote in cartridge history.
I will admit, just to skew it a little bit in my direction too, I had the 45 Super, which was a reloading thing back in the day when Gary Hyman and Dean Grinnell were doing it. They were taking 45. They were taking 45 Win mag cases, trimming them down to length, and they were taking 451 Detonics brass and trimming it to 45 ACP length. However, what they didn't know was the 451 D mag was actually 45 Winchester Magnum cases cut to their length. But then I had the 40 Super, which was a 40, now follow me here, 45 Win mag case trimmed to 10 millimeter length, bottleneck to 40 cal.
Okay.
So now we drove a 135 grain bullet to 2,000 feet per second. Then we started punching body armor, and like level 2A, level 2, and we're like, oh fuck, this is
Right.
now armor piercing. We bracked it off to 1,800 feet per second. And all of a sudden now it stopped going through armor, but man, it threw that gelatin off the table. But again, really like a wildcat, if anything. 10 millimeter and 40 Smith & Wesson. Let's run with that right now.
Okay.
Well, what are you guys' thoughts on the 10 mil and the 40 Smith & Wesson?
Don't care. Don't care. I mean, the 10 millimeter is kind of getting a little bit of renaissance right now. Some people are talking about it and using it and stuff like that. The 40 S&W had its place. It filled a void that people felt like we needed to fill at the time, which turned out maybe not, because the 9 millimeter wasn't as bad as we thought it was. And when we talk about these obscure cartridges, I'll just be honest with you, don't care. I mean, these guys might.
Well, it fails the Walmart test, and that,
I like the Walmart test. I really do like that.
but you know, in 1986 we had the famous FBI shooting, and that shortly thereafter the 10 made its debut, and then that was too much for everybody to handle, so they had to dial it back, and everybody said, "What's the point? Let's just shorten the whole case and make it 40." 40 came along. As you said, it was very popular for a while, but it was a loud, hard recoiling, unpleasant gun to shoot.
It tore up guns.
So it had its for a few decades. It was here, and then we had 357 SIG that was in there too. But pretty much all handgun history anymore. As you say, the 10 has made a slight resurgence now, and I guess I talked to some people that say that people are buying it. Well, but I suspect it's going to be a hump, and it's going to.
Speaking of humps,
Go.
Mike, what do you think?
Well, when the 10 mil first came out, of course I had to have one, so I got a Delta Elite, and I said, this isn't that bad, And again, I was weighing against that 357 mag I'd carried for years and years. Shortly thereafter, the FBI jumped on that with the 1076 and that sort of thing, and quickly discovered, first of all, the gun was a boat anchor. It was heavy, kind of hard hiding that in your spiffy little suit and whatnot. Females, so difficult for them as well. It might have fared a little better if they had come up with a different bullet launcher. I don't know how you would make that smaller. The 10 survives to this day, or the resurgence, I think has to do with outdoorsmen who carry that thing for a hunting round or whatnot. I think in one of the Glock annuals some years ago, like the cops or somebody in Iceland or some godforsaken place where it's cold and they have polar bears use those things. So I think there's a niche for it. It's kind of narrow. I remember I think it was Clay County, Florida, had 10 mils as a duty gun. They were using a Proload thing. Yep. And John Koppel was the guy from Proload. Yep. He says not only did the round work well, he said, we talk about one-shot stops. He says, we hit guys with one round and they die right away. So I don't know. I don't know how many shootings we were talking. So it fills a niche. I don't think it's ever going to take over our little world here. And as John said, it fails the Walmart test. You know, I'm a garage reloader, and I load that stuff, and I shoot. I had at least 3 10 mils at one point in time. I think I got it down. I think I have 2 left. 40 S&W, same thing. As soon as that came out, I had to have one. And again, if I shoot the 40, it's a little snappy, and if I'm not shooting a 9 next to it, I don't notice it that much. But definitely, not everybody has the same threshold for the muzzle flip and the recoil. And yet again, we're talking 1990, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. We all looked a little different then. We felt a little different. Now, my right hand has some very serious arthritis in it. I have a difficult time getting a grip on the gun. So I'm more than happy shooting 9s now. 357 SIG, oh boy. That's another story. The outfit I worked for, we had a flirtation with that for a few years. We had 357 SIG duty guns, and we even bought some Triton ammunition for that. Lo and behold, we come to find out it was very, very hard on the guns, and what we were experiencing with the Glocks was, at that time, I think they learned a lesson by the time they got the Gen 4. They're using the same captive recoil spring guide for all their guns, the 40, the 9, the 357 SIG, and also the simunition gun. Well, let me think about that for a second. If you have a 1911, for example, if you're shooting a hardball, or you've got 18, 19-pound spring, something like that in there, 9, a little lighter, et cetera, they're using the same damn spring. So what we experienced with that was after these guns got a little mileage on them, the slide was unlocking too fast, and it was chipping the tip of the striker off. So he bang, bang, bang. What the hell's going on here? Hello, Glock. I don't want to get into all the ugly politics of that. We swapped out some strikers. The same thing happened, and they couldn't resolve the problem. I don't think it was specific to Glock. I just think people had similar experiences with S&W M&Ps. I know a couple departments by me had SIG 229s and 357 SIG, was beating them up too. You look on the other side of the slide, it was all peened up and banged up in there. So the one thing that we noted, we're going to go back to the 9 mils, is again, we get the gelatin blocks out and the chronograph and this and that. And at the time we were shooting Winchester, I was on the state contractor or what have you at the time. And we had the, I guess with the Secret Service load and the 357 SIG 125 SXT. And it was a pretty snappy load, probably talking 1350, 1360, something like that. And we tested it against our 9 mil load was the 127 plus P plus SXT. Wasn't a dime's worth of difference. You were talking maybe 30, 40 feet per second. Performance in gelatin was, if you laid those 2 bullets down and measured the depth of penetration, not much different at all. So you're paying a pretty good buck for the 357 SIG ammo, but beats the hell out of your gun, or you can shoot this stuff, which was cheaper, okay? And it didn't, even the plus P plus 9 didn't beat the gun up that bad. So I don't know. I think you might get a little bit more performance in some of those exotic rounds. I don't think they have much more to offer than things like 9 mil and 45.
No, good point, good point. Moss, what do you think?
Well, as Mike said, the 10 millimeter really died a borning. There's a myth that FBI agents couldn't handle full power 10 mil recoil, so they went to the lower powered load. That's not true. John Hall and his people at the firearms training unit at Quantico had determined the 180 grain bullet at around 1,000 was giving them optimum penetration and controllability. So that was the FBI standard load to begin with. But that was essentially duplicated in the shorter 40 S&W cartridge that came out in 1990. So you could get a thinner grip or more rounds in the gun. And the 40 immediately obsoleted the 10 as a police gun. As Mike said, its real renaissance has been as an outdoorsman's gun. The deep penetration of the proper bullet in a full power 10 millimeter comes pretty close to that of 44 Magnum. And when you're worried about being eaten by a grizzly bear that's, you know, coming at you at high speed, 16 rounds with relatively light recoil sounds like a whole lot better deal than 6 rounds with heavier recoil. And it's become almost the official outdoors gun in Alaska and the parts of the lower 48 that have bears, or people who simply want to have a really good outdoor gun. The 40 S&W was really a different deal. If you look at it historically, the big switch from the revolver to the duty auto started in the mid-1980s. The first major department to adopt autos at all was Illinois State Police, 1967, with a 9mm Model 39 Smith & Wesson. Not until the early 80s did another state police adopt an auto, with New Jersey and Connecticut coming online almost simultaneously with the HKP-7 M8 and the Beretta 92 respectively. So mid-80s, the trend is now starting to turn into a sea change. And among the rank and file, the cops, it split almost 50-50, as it did with FBI. The 10 mil originally, remember, was meant to be a compromised cartridge. You had one faction in the FBI that was largely led by John Hall, who by that time was head of the firearms training unit, that wanted bigger, better 45 ACP. But we're talking an 8 to 9 round gun. With the technology of the time, the other half of the guys, led at FBI by Bill Vanderpool, both very influential among the rank and file, wanted 16-shot 9mm. Well, if you're in charge of several thousand agents of all heights, weights, etc., and you've got to find something that satisfies them both, going from the 6-shot revolver to the 12-shot 40 S&W, you're literally doubling the firepower and satisfying the guys who want lots of bullets. The caliber's got a 4 in it, and it's acceptable to the guys who've got to have a 45. And it was, for its time, an effective compromise. Over the years, a lot of people realized, well, wait a minute, if I'm on one side or the other of this debate, I don't need compromise. And what was happening, other trends were influencing things outside of the ballistics world. In criminal behavior, we were seeing more and more multiple carjackings. The carjacking wasn't the lone dirtbag with a knife or a .32 anymore. It was 3 or 4 guys, like a drill team, coming out of a car at once jumping it. The home invader wasn't one drugged out psycho kicking down your front door. It was 3 of them, and a couple of them had long guns. We were seeing more bad guys wearing body armor than in the time of John Dillinger. We had all the designer drugs, the fentanyl, et cetera, that reduces pain and psychological shock. And all those things militated for more rounds in the gun for the good guys to fight back, which favored the 9mm. So you had a bunch of different trends. So literally the sociological trend from the criminologists watching criminal behavior, as well as the ballistics lab, as well as the gun designers. And in 1990, when Glock got the jump on Smith & Wesson, as soon as they announced the 40 S&W, they chambered the Glock 17 and 40 as the Glock 22, and now you had 16 with the 4s, and it sounds to everybody like here's the best of both worlds. And within a couple of years, go back and look, the Glock 22, 40 caliber, was the most popular law enforcement issue handgun in America. In the teens, as has been said already, FBI is enormously influential. It's like they affect other law enforcement agencies like Harvard Business School affects Fortune 500 companies. And when in the mid-teens, they said, hey, our new studies show the 9mm is equal in stopping power, but easier to control, you know, more rounds, lighter recoil, happy. That now has become the trend. And it's going to be interesting to see where things go in the next 20 years.
So we did this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've noticed that in the ammo side for many, many years. 10mm, case in point, when it first came out, Norma was the only manufacturer of ammo. Right. It was a 200 grain at 1,200 feet per second. And then we had a TV show called Miami Vice that came out. And what was the gun that Crockett was using?
Bren 10.
A Bren 10. Full size, stainless steel Bren 10. So now he's pushing this 10mm, but at that time, that cartridge was at 1,200, a 200 grain at 1,200 feet per second. Then, but it was snappy. It was actually when we did the 45 Super, our 200 grain was 1,200 feet per second, and it was snappy. But then all the manufacturers of ammunition shied away from that, what Norma was doing, and they just went with the 180 grain, 165 grain. Hell, we went all the way down to 135 with our 10 mil. But it was interesting, and here we are in full circle again. One thing that has not gone full circle we can talk about, that a lot of people don't understand. Let's talk about rifles for a moment, carbines. How many of us remember the day you used an M16 in Vietnam? My first rifle was an AR-15 SP1 when I was a kid. Back in the day, before the 1989 import ban. You can walk into any gun store and find a Valmont, FN, FAL, FN Para, HK91, HK93. If you saw a Colt AR-15, and maybe they had a Colt CAR-15, the modern day M4, in stock, they were just two of many black rifles, if you want to call them that. And then, of course, there was the Ruger Mini 14, and there was a bunch of other variants. Then, the assault weapon ban, or the importation ban, of 1989. Then after that, the only thing that was left was the AR-15 in the United States.
Well, just about. But
Just about.
That import ban enfranchised companies like Robinson Arms out in Salt Lake City. DS Arms in Illinois. It makes the American version of the FAL. They were literally enfranchised by that legislation because now they don't have to compete with all these guns being imported.
Well, and even like Century Arms, they were taking parts kits and building HKs
Right.
and other rifles. But isn't it interesting that today, any rifle you're going to find is a derivative of an M4 in today's market. Even the HK, the 416, it's a derivative of the M4. How one piece of legislation changed the entire gun industry overnight.
That was its intent,
Yeah.
to make those guns unavailable. Let's be honest, that's what it was all about.
Right.
It did what it was supposed to do. Sure helped the companies, though, that make ARs.
Yeah, they didn't even exist back then, so
Yeah.
all of a sudden everyone started making ARs.
Not to the level they do now. I mean,
Yeah.
today, when they call them Barbie for men,
Right.
because you can buy them and dress them up and do all the accessories that are available for them. And the current generation probably doesn't even realize what you're talking about.
Right. At the SHOT Show, I think I stopped counting at, I don't know, 30 or 40, the number of companies purporting to make M4s. They don't make them, they assemble them, of course. But it's all domestic, so it's all fine.
Yeah.
And that's really the difference between these ARs is the quality of the components they're using to
Right.
assemble them.
Right, but Alex Robinson out there in Salt Lake makes this XCR, which is, it's not a derivative of the M4. It's very popular. He sells a lot of them. And Dave Salvaggio there at DS Arms makes the FAL, which continues to be popular. But of course, it's made domestically, so he can sell them. So that's a couple of exceptions to the Stoner rule. But I'd have to agree that the original Stoner, of course, they call it direct impingement. That is really not true. They simply move the gas piston to the bolt carrier. It's still it's not a direct impingement gun. The French Mas 4956 was a direct gas impingement. There was a gas tube that fitted into a socket and literally blew the bolt carrier back. The Stoner system doesn't work that way. There's an expansion chamber in the bolt carrier, and they simply move the piston back to the bolt carrier. Now the HK4, the enormously popular HK416 that everybody's using now, they've moved the gas piston back up to its conventional position near the gas block. But in profile, when you look at a profile, they all look exactly the same, as you say. And I'll add one more editorial comment and then shut up. Just as I made the comment earlier that as you travel, the only caliber that makes sense is 9mm, just from the standpoint of availability. Well, when you travel with a rifle, the only caliber that makes sense is .223 or .556. That's the only caliber that makes sense because it's available everywhere. And I can't keep track of the rifle calibers out there. They're out there, but I think when you're sifting through the smoldering rubble of what used to be a Cabela's, you'll find some 9mm, and you'll find some .223. I'm not sure you're going to find any 7.62 Herfendorfer or some other caliber that you think is the best in the world. If it's not available, it fails the Walmart test, I'm not interested.
And you know that 5.56 really, as an American law enforcement rifle, as an armed citizen rifle, that cartridge works fine. I mean, I can understand the military where they're shooting from mountain to mountain, where they want something maybe a little bit different. But for most of what we're doing, that 5.56 works just fine.
We don't need all that range. We don't need that penetration.
Yeah, we don't.
It's,
they're using ARs in law enforcement at pistol distances.
Sure. Beyond 75 meters, I can't even tell what I'm shooting at. You know, the rules of engagement don't change with the gun you're using. We still have to have an articulable threat that we can describe. So, you know, a 500-meter gun, wonderful. But I don't think for domestic defense you're going to have an opportunity to take advantage of that.
I think it works just fine for
So,
that.
and when I was overseas, you know, we shot a lot of people with that .223. And as long as you don't have to shoot through anything, within about 150 meters, it's fine. It's fine. We saw them. I never saw one get up. And so I think for personal defense, I'm not sure it's the best in the world, but it's certainly adequate. And in addition to which, I can find it at Walmart.
And it's easy to use.
What about your department?
Well, we recently got new rifles. And prior to that time, rifles were a very hard sell with the powers to be. We were very resistant. 9/11 changed all that. Prior to that time, we had a few rifles, and after that, we started, then some guys got rifles, and now everybody has a rifle. Right after 9/11, first of all, we're only going back 20 some odd years. There wasn't the whole bunch of different outfits making these things like there is now. And I think John's estimate of 30, I think is low. I think there's probably at least twice as many outfits making AR style rifles anymore. So I can remember calling around, say, hey, we need to buy some rifles to the various, people on our contract. And, Colt was all backlogged. We ended up getting a couple of Bushmasters, which weren't my favorite at the time, but we made them work. And after that time, I wanted to get more. I think we got another batch of them. Before I pulled the plug and retired, I was out teaching someplace in Madison, Wisconsin, some sheriff's department. They say, hey, we got a bunch of these 1033 guns, ARs. They're actually M16A2s, so we got those. Prior to retirement, I had gotten some. I tried getting, there were no ARs in the available through 1033, free guns. I got a bunch of M14s. They were nice guns. The guys who had them loved them. And we used those to shoot bears, believe it or not. They use them in that regard. And it was kind of interesting. It made an impact when you had your four-wheel drive truck and you had an 870 shotgun on one side and an M14 on the other side. We never gave them back. We still have them. They've been taken out of service. I think like the Honor Guard may use them or something like that now. That's about it. But we had, like I said, Bushmasters. I the XM15, I think it was a little M4 style deal. We had some guns that were given to us because back in the People's Republic, common citizens couldn't own an original Colt AR with a flash hider or whatnot. You would have the cosmetically approved version that you'd have a muzzle brake but not a flash hider,
Right.
and you couldn't have a bayonet lug, and you could have a fixed stock but you couldn't have a telescopic stock, that kind of nonsense. So we did pick up a few Colt ARs that way, and the M16 A2s, and so we had a mishmash of rifles for years and years. And recently, within the last year, we've got all the troops now have a nice AR, and so there you have it. So that's where we're at now, and there's no optics. We don't issue any optics with them. Some guys have put their own red dot on there or whatnot. They do have lights on them, and there you have it. So they're far better equipped than the stuff that we had in my generation when you went forth and did whatever you had to do with your 6-shot revolver. And maybe, we didn't even have issued shotguns at first. You brought your own shotgun. And some guys would throw a rifle in the car, but it's a world different now. So they're far better equipped.
Boss?
Totally agreed. One thing we've left out of the conversation was the Mini 14 and the M1A during that period, which I personally think are still a viable weapon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the M14, M1A, and 308, ideal. In fact, Springfield Armory has always made those.
I should have mentioned Springfield Armory because they're all domestic, of course, and they.
Agreed. And Ruger now has always had the Mini 14.
14.
They started doing ARs, but they always had the Mini 14.
The Mini 14s were at one time half the price of an AR, a commercial AR. Now they're just as much money.
Yeah.
Well, you also got to take into account the likability factor. Whether they're cops or armed citizens, people like the AR platform. They like the M4. I mean, when you guys were training cops, how many of them really liked going and shooting that shotgun a lot? I mean, there were a few, but now cops of all sizes, you take them out to the range to shoot that AR-15, they like it. They like doing it. They shoot it very well, and you can get people very capable with that platform very quickly. And then maintain it. Myself, as a case in point, I spend most of my range time with a pistol. I probably break out my AR 3 or 4 times a year just to stay acquainted with it, because I think every American should be a rifleman.
Yes.
Within about 60 rounds, I'm hitting really well with that gun. If I only shot my pistol 3 or 4 times a year, I wouldn't be getting real good with it in 60 rounds. It's just not the same thing. But in my neck of the woods, the shotgun is probably all but gone with the exception of beanbags. Everybody's using ARs, and you never have trouble getting to go out to the range and shoot them. Something to be said for that.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, 60 rounds of buckshot would be a pretty heavy load, wouldn't it?
Yeah, anybody that say, we're going to do a five-day shotgun class. Oh my God. Yeah, right.
I'm getting too old for that.
Yeah.
Well, that actually, it's a good point. Shotguns were a big deal early on. I even remember at the nuclear power plant, we were allowed revolvers and we were allowed shotguns, 12-gauge shotguns. And we were only allowed double-aught buck, no slugs.
No slugs.
And this is a nuclear power plant that you're supposed to be protecting from the bad Hajis coming in over the fence, and that's all you have. Then 9/11 happened. Then all of a sudden ARs was okay. But some mutual friends of ours, one Dean Caputo, police officer from Arcadia PD in California, he had ARs. He had motorcycle cops with M4s on their motorcycles, on the side of the motorcycle. But then the argument was also being made for the engagement distance that these guys are getting into gunfights. You go back to a 12 gauge with a slug or double-aught buck, that's a game changer to stop a fight quick, because now that does go through the barriers, the car. people get hit with double-aught buck, they're going to stop and think about things, versus sometimes a 5.56, they don't stop. So are we full circle again?
Well, within its operational parameters, there's nothing like a 12 gauge. I mean, anybody that tries to argue that's kidding themselves, because it's probably as definitive of a small arm that you can have within the distances it's intended. I go back again as a police trainer doing in-service training. People just didn't want to shoot it. They got the very minimal amount of time and then they were done with it. You hand them an AR, they want to shoot it, and they want to shoot it all day.
Yeah, I've had female officers, they'd fire 1 or 2 rounds. I'm not shooting this, and you can't make me.
Yeah.
And so I don't care how good a weapon it is, it's a moot point.
Yeah, you can pull it in tight, or you can push pull, whatever technique you want. They just won't shoot it. I should back up. Shotgun enthusiasts will shoot it all the time. Those who are not enthusiasts will never shoot it enough to get the level of proficiency I think we would all like.
Right.
Well, now I did an instructional video with you on 12 gauge.
We did.
On shotgun.
I'm the odd guy out because I like shotguns and I still shoot them, and our outfit still shoots them. We don't have too much of an issue with that until we start shooting slugs at extended distance. And then some of the weak reeds have a difficult time keeping them in the silhouette. The guys, the hunters, the outdoorsmen and whatnot, they're shooting a group of slugs like this at 50 yards, no problem. I thought years ago, I made a comment that shotguns will eventually evolve into the specialist tool, and the rifles will become, patrol rifles. Everybody's going to have one of those, and that's pretty much where we're at right now. I don't think there's anything out there in the police armory anyway that's more a definitive a stopper than a 12 gauge slug. It does everything I need for it to do, and at the ranges we typically encounter bad guys, it's not a problem for a guy who's squared away with to get hits on that bad guy. And I like the fact that it goes through a lot of stuff. Car doors, which is problematic for some 223 rounds for sure. Windshield glass, I mean, this stuff plows right through. And I kind of favor those little Brennicky slugs. They're pretty hard and have some tremendous penetrating power. So I still think there's an application for it. There's guys on my job who would rather take the shotgun out of the car in some ugly call than the rifle. But I can't dispute the fact that most people will get tuned into shooting the rifle. And I was out west someplace in Colorado doing a class one time, and I talked to a gentleman who was a trainer from one of the departments out there, and he says, I forget how many people they had, 80, 90, something like that. And he said, we got rifles, and the town got us rifles and an optic. He says, one of our female officers who was sort of a weak shooter, she went out either like Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve to the trailer park, and which was a problem area. And bad guy doing bad things, 80-some yards, one shot, game over. So there's something to be said for that for the non-enthusiast. The downside of that, because they're so damn easy to shoot and shoot to a fairly high standard, is at least in the law enforcement world, I see an awful lot of departments taking shortcuts with that. We'll just go out and we'll shoot a little bit. And they can shoot the gun, but the manipulation, the operational skills, they're terrible. We've all seen there was something that was online a couple of years back with a female officer responding to a bank robbery, and she had the magazine and the gun backwards and that kind of stuff. I don't know, but I see a lot of people taking shortcuts. And to drive that point home, we had an incident in my home state. It's probably about 3 years ago now. It was a hostage situation about 15 yards away. I forget how many cops were involved in this. They all had ARs. And they let loose with about 60 some odd rounds, 20 of which who hit the bad guy, put him down. The other 40 went someplace down there, including one that went uprange, so somebody had an AD in the middle of that stuff. So I'm not making this stuff up, but my point is, if I had the gauge out with a good dose, I kind of prefer in buckshot that federal LE-132 load. Shoot a group about this, one press of the trigger, game's over.
I don't disagree with you. I've always liked the shotgun. It's the troops that don't care for the shotgun.
Right.
And I find it interesting that you think a law enforcement agency would take a shortcut.
Imagine that.
Imagine that, yeah.
We'll do what's minimally required.
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
Mas, what are your thoughts?
The shotgun will remain as a specialty weapon. I certainly think the patrol rifle is more versatile and so much more manageable. Over the years, I did cases of female officers suing the department because they had been crippled for life shooting 12-gauge slugs in buck by training in which they were taught to hold the gun wrong. According to federal cartridge, with the typical lightweight patrol shotgun, a full-power rifled slug is about the same recoil as a 375 H&H Magnum out of an 11-pound elephant gun. So you got someone who's built small and delicate. You haven't shown her how to properly mount the gun, and now you're asking her to rapid fire an elephant gun. As one of their doctors testified in court, he said, let me put it in layman's terms, they've ripped her arm out of the socket.
That's a valid point. I mean, that's, you don't take that into consideration, that if they're not trained properly, they're going to hurt themselves, literally hurt themselves using a shotgun.
And they don't
One
like
of the obstacles
training.
I've overseen
Good point.
with shotgun training is ill-suited equipment, particularly length of pull with the stocks. And we've all in our world encountered this, you know, real men shoot it this way, and we have big guns and that kind of thing, but they don't make a reasonable accommodation. And there's all sorts of case law that'll support that. Christine Hansen versus Webster and that kind of stuff, about you better have equipment suitable for these people to work with here.
Well, that's actually stated in the Americans for Disabilities Act.
I
The
bring that up
employers
too.
have to supply
So-
equipment that all employees can use.
What we've done is we have take-home vehicles and take-home rifles and take-home shotguns. It's issued to you, no one else. So all the folks, male or female for that matter, who have are smaller in stature, we put a youth stock on there, and that solved 99% of the problem right there. And you know, once again, they've taken shotgun out of basic academy training. They don't do that in New Jersey anymore. But I can remember sitting there watching small statured guys and girls doing this stuff, and you see the buttstock would just drift down to the bicep and just beat the living hell out of them. At the end of the day, they have a purple arm. And as Moss said, I mean, I'm familiar with one case where a female had actually lost the use of her arm because of getting beat up like that. But it doesn't have to be that way. Again, if you had reasonable loads in the gun, we're shooting the federal, I don't think it's an oxymoron of sorts, low recoil, but it's not a full powered slug. But that's going to kill your ass dead, at any kind of reasonable range that you would encounter a bad guy in. I don't feel bad about that particular round at all. So it comes down very often to the equipment and the training. And I know a lot of guys, back in the day would overdo it. Now we have 4 live fire training sessions a year, and a couple, maybe a sim session, simunitions, and lots of DT stuff, open hand stuff. And every one of those sessions includes all 3 of those guns: rifle, pistol, and shotgun. And they get a full day out of it. I don't hear complaining about shooting the shotgun too much. But yet again, we keep the round count reasonable, and that's that.
And proper training.
Yep.
Something that we may have overlooked. I became a police officer in 1970. In those days, we had height and weight minimums. 5'10", 160 pounds, or you need not apply. If your name ended in a vowel, you need not apply. If you had a vagina, you need not apply. We hired all average to large size males, and this wasn't nearly the issue that it is today. We're hiring people with small hands. We're hiring people that weigh 125 pounds, male and female. And as Dave said, they bleed red blood. You'll hear people are, well, they shouldn't be police officers. What are we arguing about? The Supreme Court has told us if they want to be a police officer, they can be a police officer. We have to, as trainers, figure out a way to equip them and train them so they can die of old age.
I heard many a police trainer say you have to train them in spite of themselves, you know, whether they want it or not. And
Yeah.
let's be honest, the law enforcement trainer is seldom the path to the chief's office.